started working for MPW, our job was to provide medical support and care for church planters, either American or national church planters around the world. And the church planters around the world that needed medical support were the ones in remote rural locations. And I think shortly after we started working with MPW, I began to pray that God would allow me to see the people that we are going to through His eyes, with His heart, so that I would have His heart when I traveled. So when we got back from those trips, and I started to pray, and I started to say, God, let me, with my eyes, see your heart. And that turned into a book called My Eyes, His Heart. And there are 22 stories in My Eyes, His Heart. So I'm going to read you a story called The Mango Tree. Okay, if you can't hear me, raise your hand. You're on call for... My wife tells me I don't speak loud enough. So.
What are you saying?
What was that? That's a joke. He didn't tell us that. The Mango Tree. The Sunday sun was midway in the spring sky. A canvas tarp was attached to the trees above to block the sun's direct rays. Nearly 100 people crowded shoulder to shoulder under the tarp. The temperature was rising in the little makeshift church. Charles began his sermon. I forgot in the introduction. Creole is from Haiti. Tagalog is Philippines. A kushma is a special kind of a dress that Amazon tribes wear. It's more of a sack with a hole in the top and the arms. And of course, we pronounce the word shari. You say shari. That's from Bangladesh. And Bengali is the language of the Bengali people. Charles began his sermon. The melodious Creole was an offering to the ears. Creole to English, and Creole again. I strained to understand the words. Undoubtedly an excellent sermon, yet something lost in the translation. My eyes drifted from one person to another. There were small beads of sweat forming on the forehead of a pretty young girl in a spotless white nylon dress to my right. She had a red bow in her hair, and her thin body and black skin were a stark contrast to her white dress. The little girl with the big brown eyes who'd been watching me now lay asleep on her mother's lap, no longer interested in the stranger beside her. Several men nodded and said, "Amen." An older woman sitting in front smiled approvingly. My eyes drifted from inside the little open-air church to the tree just outside, a mango tree. Thousands of almost ripe mangoes hung suspended from the stems. Many showed the telltale yellow spot, signaling they would soon be ripe. Their juicy yellow pulp, sweeter than even the best Georgia peach. And I remembered several weeks earlier I had tasted my first mango pie. It was on another Sunday. The sun had also been hot that day, and sweat had soaked through my shirt. We had begun with familiar praise choruses, and then I had strained to understand as Marcello preached. Tagalog, melodious as it rolled from his tongue. Tagalog to English, then Tagalog again. That day there had been another young girl in a clean white dress, gently fanning away the heat. Her brown skin a contrast to her white dress. There had been a child on her mother's lap, sitting beside me, staring intently until sleep overcame her, secure in her mother's arms. And then I remembered another Sunday morning when Rick preached from Revelation. He spoke about peoples from every nation and every tribe, crying, "Hallelujah, for the Lord our God, the Almighty reigns." The mid-morning Amazon sun had flooded beneath the thatched roof of our little makeshift church. I sat cross-legged and stared into the dense jungle hills. No Batsi-Genga tribal people surrounding me. We sang, "Make Me a Sanctuary," and the jungle stood silent. There had been a pretty young woman barefoot, wearing a brown kushma. She had pinned green parrot feathers to her shoulder for decoration. to dress in her Sunday best. There had been red paint on her brown face and a naked, sleeping, sweat-drenched child on her hip. Mangoes had been presented to us as a precious gift for the visiting strangers.
May I interrupt? Can you tell me where this is?
Where?
Different places.
These are all different places.
Oh, okay. I beg your pardon.
Then I remembered. You'll understand this. With an inward smile, I recalled how Osvaldo had rapidly switched back and forth between Spanish and English for the sake of the mixed congregation. Everyone in the little church had laughed when he became confused and could not remember which language he was preaching in. That day, hymns had been sung in Spanish with familiar English tunes. There had been amens from the men and women in the church in the Aguan Valley, and a child asleep in her mother's arms, and a pretty young woman in a clean white dress with beads of sweat on her forehead. We had all eaten a fellowship lunch together. Dessert had been a delicious yellow fruit. And then I remembered a small thatched hut, a makeshift church near my home. I had often preached there in Bengali. There had been sleeping, naked children in parents' arms, and pretty young girls in clean, bright sharis, with thin brown faces and beads of sweat on their foreheads. My hymn book, Cristo Songi, had become tattered and worn over the years. There had been a beautiful mango tree near one side of the church. I watched the mangoes grow as I passed by each day, mentally calculating when they would be ripe. The tree provided shade and sweet fruit for our little church as we shared our fellowship meals together. Many thousands of miles separate us, yet seemingly the same tarps and thatch block the Sunday morning sun. Messages of encouragement and translation so that all can understand. Amens from the congregation, nearly naked children securely held in the loving arms of their parents. Pretty young women with brown and black faces, dressed in white. All my brothers and sisters. Hot mornings, generous hearts, hymns of praise, a delicious yellow fruit, and unimaginable poverty.
Unimaginable
Poverty. Thin, barefoot, and naked, some sick and some hungry. Haiti, the slums of Manila, tribes in the Amazon, a jungle valley in Honduras, and a rural village in Bangladesh. Places of little account due to the rulers of this world, yet places and faces forever resplendent in the light of God's presence. How beautiful the radiant bride who waits for her groom with his light in her eyes. How beautiful when humble hearts give the fruit of pure life so that others may live. The print was too small for me to read from now. How beautiful, how beautiful, how beautiful is the body of Christ. How beautiful the feet that bring the sound of good news and the love of the King. How beautiful the hands that serve the wine and the bread and the sons of the earth. How beautiful, how beautiful, how beautiful is the body of Christ. One day they will be there, the brown and black faces mixed with the white, eyes that are round and dark, and some that are blue and green. The dresses, the kushmas, the sharis will be made of fine linen, bright and pure. Covenant children and the parents who held them in their arms, singing the song of the Lamb. And there will be no translators, for we will worship with one voice, one heart, singing, Hallelujah, the Almighty reigns. Will I recognize the pretty young girl in the white dress and red bow in her hair, or the naked baby in the arms of her mother? The barefoot woman with the kushma and the parrot feathers? Will I recognize them in the reflection of the eyes of the bridegroom? Will I recognize them hidden in the holiness of the Lord? And mercy will flow from God, unworthy as we are, and we shall dwell together in his presence. Joy unspeakable. And there will be a river flowing from the throne of God, and a tree that yields its fruit in its season. And the leaves are for the healing of nations, and the fruit will be sweeter than even the best Georgia peach. And there we shall feast on the fruit together, those who serve. And those who came to serve the body of Christ in the presence of the Almighty King.
Thank you. Gotta follow him.
Yeah.
Excuse me, didn't you say what is in the library?
Should be in the library unless somebody took it out. It's been printed 3 times, and we're thinking about reprinting it. Anyway, you can buy used copies or find one in the library here. Eventually, probably reprint it.
I already said you might find.
Oh, well, for the used ones, they're $6.95. For the new one, it's $70.
What about autograph copies?
Autograph copies are $1,000.
So what, we have a whole channel dedicated to but tonight,
Unfortunately, we are going to go from the
No.
sublime to the ridiculous. While I'm getting myself prepared here, go ahead and turn to Genesis 6.
there's Wi-Fi issues.
First 5 verses, that's what we're going to be talking about. That's what my assignment is tonight. Somebody asked a question specifically about some of the features of 6, 1 through 4. But then at the very end of the question, it said something to the effect of cover everything in 6, 1 through 4. So I'm going to try as well as I can to cover everything in 6, 1 through 4. But as you will notice if you try to read it, there is just a cornucopia of stuff here in these few verses. And like I said, I'm going to try, but I may or may not be a little bit tied to my notes because my brain just can't handle all this stuff being jumbled around. There's so many different issues here. So let's get started. The first word, at least in my NIV translation, it says when. So I thought it would be a good idea to say when. When is this? Well, it is about 120 years before the flood. It's during the time of Noah. It is, if the standard calculations that you read are correct, it is about 1,656 years after creation. That would be our date of 2348 BC. So, for those of you that are kind of detail-oriented, that's the detail. That's where we are when we plop down on Genesis 6, 1 through 4. That's the time frame that we're in. Then the next thing it says is when men began to multiply and increase greatly in number on the face of the earth. So I figure I need to address this issue of multiplying. And I hearken back about 52 years ago to when my dad told me a neat little illustration. I'm going to have to kind of tell it in a hurry. He told it in a real dramatic, long-winded fashion. He's trying to impress me, and it did, because here I am 52 years later still talking about it. But anyway, the illustration goes like this. Somebody very brilliant, maybe like Elon Musk or somebody like that, has come into town. They're starting a new factory or a new job site. They need people to work there, and he doesn't have a lot of capital. So the offer is he's going to hire you, and he'll either pay you $10,000 a week, and that money's guaranteed. It's no joke. I mean, $10,000 a week. Or, since he doesn't have a lot of capital to work with, he'll pay you 1 penny the first week. And then he'll double it every week. for a year. So in other words, the first week you make a penny. Second week you make 2 pennies. So now you've got 3. The next week he'll pay you 4 pennies. So now you've got 7. On and on and on it goes for 52 weeks. Do you have any idea how much money a penny doubled 52 times is?
Billions.
Okay, we got billions. Anybody got a better guess? Anybody got one of those scientific calculators?
Figure it out.
Just put,
Let's get Hazel back in here. She'll tell us in about
because that's what it
a
is.
couple hours.
I got that answer right.
Yeah.
It's 4.5 quadrillion.
Oh my gosh.
I was off last.
Wow.
Don't get me wrong. I am not trying to pinpoint the population on the earth before the flood. I'm not even trying to suggest that it was 4.5 quadrillion. I just want to get into our minds and get out of our minds the pop science that we were taught in school. That these struggling little bands of cavemen were in jeopardy of even survival because of the saber-toothed tiger or the dinosaur that might come and attack them.
Yeah.
I want to get into our minds that God created man. He created man male and female. He told them to be fruitful and multiply. He gave them dominion over the land, the animals, the plants. And that's what I want to be in our minds. I want, when we talk about this multiplication, it's not just a few little people like you're watching some old TV show where, the Israelites, there's like 14 of them. No, it's not like that. The population expanded, multiplied, it increased greatly on the face of the earth. So we're talking about a great population. If you want to consult more details, I do highly suggest Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis. They have a lot. Some of it's a little speculative, but he tries to stay true to the Word and stay true to what is revealed. Okay, the next thing, and now we're getting into some real debatable, controversial things. It says, daughters were born to men. Now, I want to make a couple of little points here. I'm kind of a silly person, so y'all got to bear with my silliness sometimes. But I want to make a point out of the fact that it says, and this is in the Hebrew as well as in the English or any other translation you look at, it says daughters were born to men. And I want to make a point about that. If you, and I don't really necessarily mean you, I mean the plural of that word, if you take this literally and try to say that daughters were born to men, that's the same type of silliness that you get in some of the rest of this verse, this passage, about other things that we're going to get to. And you'll understand what I'm saying in a minute, but I'll bring it back up again. So, what's really going on here, there were also sons being born. It's not just daughters. The wives were included in this, and men weren't giving birth to daughters. This is poetry. This is Hebrew poetry. And Hebrew poetry is not roses are red, violets are blue. Hebrew poetry is an idea is introduced. The idea is expounded upon. The idea is repeated. Parallel ideas are revealed. That's Hebrew poetry. And that's what we have in this passage here. In fact, the poetry has already started in chapters 4 and 5 before we plop ourselves down here in chapter 6. And I'll be bringing some of that to mind too. So, what we have when we look at verse 1, which I'm going through, is Hebrew poetry. And it's not just poetry for the sake of poetry. It's poetry with a purpose. So now, when we get to the action, we've already been introduced to these men. We've already been introduced to daughters. Now the next part is where the typical controversial stuff is said. It says, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. So that's where some action starts happening here. And that's where some controversial stuff starts taking place with different people interpreting this differently. I'm going to talk mostly about what I consider to be the correct view. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the incorrect views. I'm going to have to mention them. But so if I don't talk about something that you might be questioning, jot it down, and I'll try very desperately to have some time at the end to ask questions and have a discussion. But we're dealing with this terminology of sons of God and daughters of men. And when I read that phrase, sons of God, daughters of men, it reminds me of the Chronicles of Narnia, where the children in the book, when they go into the land of Narnia, they're constantly introduced as sons of Adam and daughters of Eve. And so that's poetry. We recognize that as poetry. But it's poetry with a purpose, and that's what we have here also. In the book of Genesis, in this chapter, we have Hebrew poetry, and it means something. This is what it means. The Bible consistently divides people into two groups, believers and unbelievers. The Bible consistently, when you look really closely at Genesis chapter 4 and Genesis chapter 5, makes a division between the line of Seth and the line of Cain. In fact, if you look even closer at the beginning of these genealogies, the line of Cain, the first person is a man. If you look at Seth, the first person is God. So that's where this Hebrew poetry starts, when it starts with the line of Seth and the line of Cain. It's making a division. It's going to expand upon that division. It's going to poetically talk about these two different groups. So when we get this term sons of God and daughters of men, this is what we have to be thinking. What has gone on in chapter 4? What has gone on in chapter 5? The division of mankind. There's a strange, it's not strange in terms of being true, but there's a strange little out of place preview at the end of chapter 4 before it begins with the line of Seth. And it says, among other things, it says, when Seth had a son named Enosh, at that time men began to call on the name of the Lord. That's another poetic thing, because when you look at the line of Seth, you see that these people are calling on the name of the Lord. When you look at the line of Cain, they're trying to make a name for themselves. All the little tidbits and all the different examples, especially when you look at this character called Lamech. You see that poetic division between the line of Seth and the line of Cain. I'm going to have a lot more to say about that, but I want to talk a little bit about the wrong view. The wrong view, I think it's more than just my opinion. I may get Mark up here at the end to vouch for me. But the wrong view, and this is throughout history, there's been this fascination, this lore about angels, which is very, very similar to Greek mythology and Roman mythology. This view says that the sons of God were angels who came and saw that the daughters of men, the women were beautiful, and they were sexually tempted, so they mated with human women and gave birth to these people called Nephilim, who were giants. And we'll get to that in a little while later, but I want to just point out a few things that they bring out that might be persuasive when you first hear it. And they say that the term sons of God always refers to angels. They bring out things like the two angels that came and appeared to Abraham and Lot. If you saw them, you would say they were men. Later on, when they went to Sodom, the men of Sodom desired these angels sexually. So the story is presented as if Why couldn't angels come and take the form of man's body and either rape or marry human women? Well, it's my job to quickly tick off some of the reasons why, even though this appears like it could be plausible, it does not stand up to biblical scrutiny. The first thing is what I said at the very beginning. To me, that's like saying, see, it says right here, daughters were born to men. There were no sons. There were no wives. Daughters were born to men. To me, it's the same kind of thing. It's taking a word out of context. It's taking a word, not realizing that it's Hebrew poetry, that there's a meaning behind why these terms are being given the way they are, and going off into fantasy land. But being a little bit more, in terms of biblical evidence, this term in Hebrew is only used a few times. It's here in Genesis 6, and it's a couple of places in Job. So my question is, why should we take the context of Job and prefer that to the context of Genesis? We've already talked about the fact that there's a context for chapter 6, and that's chapters 4 and chapters 5. So, if you look very carefully there, you see that it's almost painstakingly demonstrating that Adam was like a son of God. He was created in God's likeness. And Seth was in Adam's likeness, and so on and so on and so on. So it's pretty easy to make the connection between chapter 5 and chapter 6 that the line of Seth are sons of God. If you want a little bit more biblical food to chew on, we're not going to have time to look at all of these, but let me just call out some passages that very specifically use the phrase, not the exact Hebrew words, but use the phrase sons of God in reference to men. That's 1 Chronicles 28:6. God calls Solomon his son. Matthew 5:9, Jesus says that a certain group of people, I'll let you look it up, it's kind of homework, he calls a certain group of people sons of God. Romans 8:14, a group of people sons of God. And in the reverse, Hebrews chapter 1 verse 5 asks this question. It says, which angel has God ever called a son? So I would make the case that it's actually more evidence to show that humans are sons of God rather than angels being sons of God. More, angels and humans are just totally different creations. Angels were not created as a race. They were created as a company. However many angels were created, that's how many angels there still are. They don't procreate. Jesus told the Sadducees, y'all are all going to be familiar with this, he told the Sadducees, you're mistaken about our resurrection bodies. In eternity, we're going to be like angels. And people run off in the wrong direction with that. When we die, we're going to become angels. We're going to have wings. We're going to, no, he made a very specific point of comparison. He said we're going to be like angels in the fact that we do not marry. So the strong implication there is if they don't marry, then they don't mate. They don't procreate. So no matter how popular this angel view is on YouTube, History Channel, even among reputable preachers, it just doesn't hold any biblical water. Let me read a quote that Calvin said. Calvin said, this angelic view is abundantly refuted by its own absurdity. And it is surprising that learned men should formerly have been so fascinated by ravings so gross. Well, as you can tell, obviously I agree with Calvin. And obviously I agree with all the stuff I've already said. But none of that is the most important reason why it's not true that angels were the sons of God and women were the daughters of men. It's because it has no place in the purpose of this passage. The purpose of this passage is to show why men are going to be judged in the flood. So what have angels got to do with that? There's no mention of angels in this context whatsoever. I do just want to mention the third option, which has been somewhat popular throughout history, and it was mostly just Jewish belief. Not too many people today give it much credence, and that was that there were these kingly men in the land of Mesopotamia at this time before the flood, and they were referred to as sons of God. So they were these kingly men, and they condescended to marry peasant women. So, I'm not even going to give that any credibility, because on its own accord, that's an extra biblical, non-biblical viewpoint. They don't even deny that. They just say that this is just external to the Bible. This is what they think. So, and again, that view just has absolutely no correspondence to the purpose of the passage. So, let's move on to the next thing. And this is really neat. When you see the action of the sons of God saw the daughters of men. And in the Hebrew, it says they saw that they were good. And then it says they saw that they were good and they took. Where have we seen that before? In the early part of the Bible.
Tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
This completely mirrors the sin of Eve with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She saw it. She saw that it was good in her opinion. And she took it. So these sons of God, who are the line of Seth, they saw that the daughters of the line of Cain were good. And the definition of good probably means beautiful. So they took. And just as Eve was told something not to do and something to do, the line of Seth was evidently told something not to do and something to do. We don't necessarily have it recorded for us, but this is where the little phrase about the fact that they called on the name of the Lord. They probably instructed each generation not to be unequally yoked, not to marry an unbeliever, to carry on the godly line, to raise godly families, to be obedient to God, to listen to the commandments of God. This is why there's a distinction. This is why the phraseology, which is kind of poetic, the sons of God and the daughters of men, it's still going back to chapters 4 and 5. The line of Seth was supposed to be busy being fruitful and multiplying, raising godly families, raising families that recognized the name of God, that called on the name of God. But the line of Cain, they could care less about God. They were trying to build a name for themselves. Remember that, because we're going to get back to that again. And something Mark said in the sermon on Sunday applies here. He knew that, and that's why he said it. But it's that Satan has continually, in some kind of hopeless desperation, futile desperation, tried to attack the people of God in an effort to thwart God's redemptive purposes. And again, what do we see? We see three primary attacks. We see deception, we see persecution, and we see seduction. He deceived Eve, she sinned, she rebelled, and what happened? The fall of man. This line of Seth, he attacked by seduction. They saw that women are beautiful. They rebelled against the idea of raising a godly family, being committed to the sanctity of marriage. And they said, I'm going to do what I want to do. So they did not obey God. They rebelled against what they were told not to do, just like Eve rebelled against what she was told not to do. And they did not do what they were told to do. They did not seek to raise godly families and be fruitful and multiply. They abandoned their duty and accepted the satanic counterfeit of, the same thing we have going on now. Same thing I was duped in my life to do. Abandon the sanctity of marriage and pursue selfish, lustful behavior. Okay, so the next thing that is a little bit debated is God says in verse 3, man's days will be 120 years. There's two sides here. There are many who say that this is going to be the lifespan of man's life, 120 years. And, it's interesting to note that at about this time of the flood is when the age of men does start to decrease. Before they're living 900 years. It's very common to live 600, 500. After the flood, it goes down into the 400s, 300s, 200s. Little pop quiz, how old was Moses when he died? He was 120. Exactly. So, a lot of people think that, that's what this means, that the lifespan of man is going to be 120 years. But again, context would indicate that it's more likely that this is a countdown to the flood. God has decided that He's going to punish, wipe out the antediluvian population, which we again said was perhaps hundreds of millions, if not billions, almost just like it is today. And they've got 120 years. Not going to get into another controversy. If somebody wants to ask this question, you can later on. But this 120-year period is probably, and I think almost conclusively, what was going on in 1 Peter 3, verse 19, where it says, Jesus preached to the spirits who are in hell. We talked a minute ago about were we going to see these people? We're not going to see any of these people, except for Noah and his family. Because as Jesus preached through Noah for 120 years, absolutely no response. Absolutely no care in the world about God and His name. Absolutely no care about obeying God. Absolutely no care in grace, the offer of grace. Absolutely no care in the ark. So, we all know what happened. Now, even though time's running faster than I hoped it would, we get to the real controversial one. Who in the world are these Nephilim people? It is the most debated, it is the most controversial term in the passage, but before I tackle some other details, I am just crazy enough to try to do this. I'm going to try to oversimplify something that would normally take a long time. Just please bear with me. I think you'll understand what I'm trying to get at. Obviously, if I wrote Hebrew up there, I can't write Hebrew. But even if I did, y'all wouldn't be able to read it. This is transliteration of Hebrew. You're probably familiar with this word. You're probably not familiar with that word. What? Just blurt out. What is Yahweh? Really? For over 1,000 years, this was Jehovah. Right? I mean, y'all are old enough, like I am, to remember, it was Jehovah. So I'm going to just very quickly explain why there's a discrepancy between, the Old way of saying this was Jehovah. The new way of saying this is Yahweh. Same thing with this word, which is what's going to be the core of what we're talking about. Hebrew does not have any vowels. Hebrew just has
Hebrew has 3 vowels.
consonants. Well, I'm oversimplifying. They knew how to pronounce the words, but we don't. A group at about 500 AD of Jews, they were called Masoretes, they decided that they were going to add vowel points and cantillation marks to the Hebrew words so that we would know how to pronounce them. So, that's a fancy way of just saying they added vowels and they added little marks to know, is this Jehovah or is this Yahweh? They said it was Jehovah. So, that's the way the church took it for a long time, 1,000 years. Now, to get to where we need to go. This word, Naphal, I'm not going to go into any detail other than just to suggest that originally it meant fallen warriors. It came to mean bully. It came to mean tyrant. But the Masoretes, they decided to make it into a proper noun. They decided to make it into this race of people called Nephilim. And they were unduly influenced by Jerome. They were unduly influenced by First Enoch. John taught us about that about a month or so ago. The book of First Enoch gives all the background to this passage that we're looking at. It talks about the angels. It talks about the fact that they came and raped the women and produced this race of people called the Nephilim. The Nephilim were 300 cubits tall. Do you know how big that is?
450 feet.
That's the same size as the ark. These people were, needless to say, giants.
How tall is that?
It's 450 feet.
It's
Yeah.
taller than 100-yard taller than a football.
Right, right. So anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in too many of these details because they're silly. But I just want to make the point that instead of taking what I would say maybe they pronounced the word Naphalim and they turned it into Nephilim, made it into a proper noun, made it into a race of giants, it should have just been translated as bullies or tyrants. So this group of people called the Nephilim, they were not 450-foot tall giants that were produced by angels mating with women. They were what we see in the line of Cain. They were men who sought their own fame and fortune. Maybe they were large. The Bible does talk about people like Og of Bashan. It does talk about people like Goliath. It does talk about the Anakites. Maybe these people were large. But I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in an elevator with a basketball team? I have. And, one of them was 7 feet tall. Qualifies as a giant in my book. My son is only 6'4". He's got a reach of 6'11". And sometimes, just to be funny, when he takes pictures of the rest of the family, he'll go like this. And I'm telling you, we look like midgets. So, and he's only 6'4". Maybe you've heard of Andre the Giant, wrestler. There's another wrestler that's even taller than Andre the Giant, El Gigante. He's a Mexican wrestler. He was billed as being 8 feet tall. He was actually only 7'7". Only 7'7". But they get classified as giants. So I'm suggesting that it only takes perhaps being around 7 feet tall to be considered a giant. I will address very quickly the passage in Numbers 13:33 because I'm sure that's kind of popping into some of y'all's minds. It's the only other place the Nephilim are mentioned. And wouldn't you know, there's also an interpretation problem. The standard interpretation is it says that the Anakites were descended from the Nephilim. But the Hebrew doesn't say that. It's just making a point of comparison. They were comparing them to the Nephilim. You got to ask yourself, how in the world could they have been descended from them if they all were killed in the flood? There's an answer for that. Pure mythology, of course. They clung to the outside of the ark. Because they were the same size as the ark. So it was pretty easy. Let's just wrap your arm around the ark. But that's hogwash. That's craziness. The truth is that the passage in Numbers just says that the Anakites were like the Nephilim. They remember they had been told the stories of the Nephilim, so they knew that the Nephilim were these big bullies. It's a perfect definition of the Anakites. In fact, I would go so far as to say the Anakites were Nephilim. The passage that we're looking at, it says the Nephilim existed before and later. So all it's saying is that they were relatively large, relatively aggressive, relatively bullying types of people. The Anakites fit that definition perfectly. Last thing, we got this little bit here about they were the heroes of old, the men of renown. If you want to know a definition of the Nephilim, we have it right here. It's the only place that we have it, and it's right here. Who are the Nephilim? If anybody asks you that, all you got to do is say that they were the heroes. They were the men of renown. And I want to go back to the poetry that's in Genesis 4 and 5. The Sethites were calling on the name of the Lord. The Nephilim were building a name for themselves. That's really where the poetry takes this. So what is a Nephilim? Lamech in Genesis 4:19 is a snapshot of the Nephilim. Read it. He basically, I'm going to really butcher this, but just for the purpose of saying what it was like, he's like, Cain, he's a nobody. He was avenged 7 times. I'm to be avenged 777 times. Cain was nothing compared to me. That's a pretty good definition of the Nephilim. That's who Lamech was. So just kind of keep that in mind. The poetry, the Hebrew poetry is telling us we should be calling on the name of the Lord. We should care about what God has commanded. We should seek to obey God. We should seek to raise godly families. We should be doing what God has instructed us to do. But instead, what's going on? The corrupt human population doesn't care about God. The example, I can't write very well, so I'm just going to put marriage. But what I really mean by that is the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they said, who cares? We're going to do what we want. And then the other example is the Nephilim. So this is all poetic, Hebrew poetry now, not our poetry. This is not roses and red, violets and blue. This is the human population became great on the face of the earth. Example, they took any woman they wanted as a harem or as a marriage. So God, this is the focal point right here. God declared judgment. The other thing is the human wickedness grew great on the face of the earth. The example of that is the Nephilim. They didn't care about just society. They wanted to be their own bully. They wanted to rule the roost. There is an association with size. They evidently were big people. But they just wanted to make a name for themselves. So, I went a little longer than I wanted to. But as a transition to y'all asking questions and stuff, I'm going to tell a joke.
Oh, goody.
So get your questions ready, but I'll break through all that terrible stuff. and say, you know, on my way through all this stuff, I ran across a couple of jokes. What is the fear of giants called? Fee-fi-phobia.
You should
This
tell
one,
We're laughing at you, not with you.
I'm probably going to have to leave after I say this next one. It's not really that fit for public, but
Is it better than that one?
oh, it's worse. It's far worse. It's worse than Mark's joke.
Let's say something. Let's hear it.
Have you heard the news about the giant who had a terrible case of diarrhea?
Yes, it's all over town. You made me do it.
You know, she made it time again.
Questions and comments before I get Pastor Mark to come up here.